We all know we can never pay nurses what they are worth, but hearing the distress in Nurse Jane's voice, is there any relief in sight for nurses like Jane? Damien, do you see any relief in sight for nurses like Jane?
Well, it's a difficult question, as you properly identified, Catherine. We always took the view that paying the public service, the public sector properly was a top priority of government. And we were criticised a lot because during the period of the coalition government, we had in fact in place what the government identified as a wage cap, but properly assessed was an assessment of what the government could afford at any particular time in relation to wage rises. Now, that's a decision we took as a government for the purpose of paying public servants. And generally, during the period of the coalition government, the wages cap or determination which was set by the coalition kept pace with inflation. Now, what we're seeing at the moment is, in fact, that inflation has got away from the government in circumstances where they cannot now make the wages stay ahead of the inflation rate, which means that there are no real wage increases for public sector workers. Now, that's the problem that the government has, and it's a bit of their own making. Michelle Bullock correctly said that the best way to drive down inflation is for governments to start limiting their spending. Now, whether it's the federal government or the state governments, and she didn't differentiate between governments. She said all governments are the ones that need to wind back their spending, not just as you identified, the mums and dads and the essential workers and the families, all of whom has done that. And in fact, if you look at the retail trade figures at the moment, they give us a picture of, in fact, spending going backwards by consumers. The only people spending money at the moment are governments, and governments are the problem that Michelle Bullock has identified that are driving up inflation. So if you want some relief in relation to inflation, which is the driver for wage demands, look to government spending. And you correctly say, whether it's bureaucrats, whether it's other profligate spending by government, that's the area we should be looking at for the purposes of meeting claims. Now, I have to say that I'm not in government anymore, but 15% I would say I'd have to swallow really hard to identify how we would afford that, and the government correctly identifies that it can't afford it. What the government has said is we can afford 10.5% over 3 years. What's that? That's a wage cap. That is a wage cap, and that's what the government says it can afford. So all the noise we hear about with Chris Minns saying we got rid of the wage cap, guess what? That's a myth. They haven't got rid of the wage cap. They've told workers what they can afford, and that's what a wage cap is.
So, Damien, we have critical workers like nurses and police and firefighters, rail workers who can't even afford to live in the metro communities that they serve. I mean, this is another big problem. So is there any hope of a solution here, do you think?
Well, for rent relief and for mortgage payers, the best relief to get is reduction in interest rates. And we won't see any reduction in interest rates until governments address government spending. And that's the warning of the Reserve Bank. And it's no wonder that Jim Chalmers is attacking the Reserve Bank, because the Reserve Bank is the voice of truth to government. It's saying the ball is in your court to drive down prices. And what we are seeing is we've got young people who can't get into homes. We've got people who are the subject of mortgage stress. And the most chilling thing I heard last week was when the Reserve Bank governor said in an address which she made that people will start to lose their homes. And that's a really chilling outcome in respect of the way that this is playing out for ordinary families. When families are faced with such levels of mortgage stress that they will be forced to sell their home, that is a catastrophe which is waiting to happen. And make no mistake about this, it is a problem of government, not of the consumers.
Well, when we were listening to Nurse Jane as well, she was talking about the nurses being overworked. And I mean, we've had 1 million immigrants come in the last couple of years, and we've seen, I appreciate that immigration is a federal issue, but there's been shout outs for, people to fulfil roles like pet groomers and brothel keepers and that kind of thing. How have we gotten into a situation where we have these nurses who are completely overworked and they can't even, keep up with demand? They're not even able to provide basic healthcare services because we don't have enough people, staffing the hospitals to be able to deal with everyone. I mean, what are we going to do about that? Like, why are we not bringing in people who can be the nurses and doctors that we need?
Yeah, well, in fact, you correctly identify a problem. We've got stories coming out of, say, Blacktown Hospital where patients are sleeping on the floor in the emergency department because they can't get seen at a particular time. And we do have nurses under significant stress. There was a sign-up I saw at that rally today which said, broke and broken. And broke was in relation to their finances, broken was in relation to their spirit. Now, immigration is something which is a lever that governments can pull for the purposes of identifying those things which they want to promote. Now, pet groomers and brothel keepers I don't think are in enormous demand, quite frankly. However, nurses and tradies are. So there is a scope, as you correctly identifying, for the levers of government to be used in such a way as if you need tradies or if you need nurses, you make the special visas available for that category of people that want to come here and contribute to those things which are really crying out and in need. The immigration we've identified as a big contributor to housing affordability. So if you have a problem with housing affordability and we need to build houses, well, then clearly it's those tradies that we need. But it is very, very complex at the moment. And unfortunately, the federal government seems to have lost control of the manner in which a solution can be found. There is no indication of spending reduction by the federal government. Lots of money is going out the door on government services, whether it's childcare, aged care and the like. No proper solutions are being looked for. And one of the things, for example, we've got a big problem in aged care at the moment, and we don't have sufficient personnel to be able to staff aged care facilities. No debate or discussion is ever held about supporting people who want to look after elderly parents at home. Now, where are the policy parameters relating to aged care in the home? And no one seems to think that is a worthwhile thing. We want to move them out of homes, and maybe there's a cultural problem that we have where we don't want our parents to live with us, but certainly in a lot of multicultural communities, they want to look after their parents at home. We should have programs which assist people to look after their parents at home. Now, that's a small thing, but it is indicative of making sure that the policy parameters that we have in place are ones which are family-based policies, and ensuring that we identify the problem and have real solutions to that problem.
Damien, I absolutely agree with you. We should be having policies in place to help elderly people stay at home supported by their families. And, at the other end of the lifespan, again, we're throwing all this money at childcare. Why aren't we enabling families to be able to, mothers or fathers to choose to stay at home with their children, and instead of all those subsidies going to the for-profit childcare sector, maybe going to a parent who can then afford to stay at home. But I just have one final question, with respect to this sort of woke Labor Greens government that we're lumped with at state and federal level. We're always hearing about these grandiose plans with the government, to have all these sort of woke policies. Back in January, they put in an AHPRA code of conduct that appeared to be written by activists, and they were waffling on about colonisation and systemic, racism. And you have to wonder, when we look at the Labor government, they're wasting money and resources on these distractions, and they can't even pay nurses a living wage. So, I mean, do you agree that, the government is really trying to distract the people with all these silly diversity, inclusion, equality, sort of fancy rainbow policies, instead of focusing on what the real problem is.
Well, that's exactly the issue which I identified earlier, that governments spend money. And the question we ought to ask as I'm the Shadow Treasurer is how are you spending your money? Are you spending it on things that are really important? And what you've just encapsulated there is exactly the problem that the Reserve Bank Governor identifies. Governments have got to stop spending and wasting money. You've got to actually tighten government's belt rather than them spending money on diversity programs and the like. They are just as much responsible for the inflation rate, for the interest rates that we're all paying, much more than the consumers who have already tightened their belts and are facing enormous mortgage payments, enormous rent payments, enormous electricity bills and enormous grocery bills. These are ordinary families having to put up with that, and government goes on its merry way. And at the end of the day, someone's got to say is that when I have to pay my mortgage bill or when I lose my house, am I doing this because of decisions I've made, or is it irresponsible government? And I have to say that I think most voters are starting to say government needs to rein in the way that it spends money and drive down the interest rates and the inflation rate, which currently is affecting us all.
Well, I think we're probably in agreement, Damien, that when we look at the Labor Greens government in federal, they're probably going to be a one-term government, and it's clearly because of their mismanaging of the economy and the fact that they're looking to problems outside of Australia instead of Australians first.